Tonight's event is the last of the fall events. It features two poets. One is a first-year entering graduate student in the English department who will be working on her PhD over the next bundle of years. And her name is Jane Gregory. And she will be introduced by another first-year student poet, Christopher Miller, if any of you were lucky enough to hear him read at the, what was the last reading or the one before that? One before that. You will know who Christopher Miller is, also a formidable poet. And then a young poet who is an undergraduate and swept the University of California, UC Berkeley offers a number of literary prizes, and you submit anonymously with just a number assigned to your submission. And this gentleman swept the awards. He won a prodigious number of the ones that are offered. He's a brilliant poet, a musician, plays with a band called Butterfly Bones, and his name is Steve Lance, and he will be introducing the featured guest poet this evening, who is also a Berkeley poet, but not a UC Berkeley poet, Alan Bernheimer. So I'm going to step aside and let Christopher Miller take over, then Jane will read, then Steve Lance will introduce Alan, and Alan will read. And then you will buy copies of Alan's new book. Thank you. Christopher?
Can everybody hear me? All right. Thanks, Len. In a radio lecture entitled Exploring the World of Perception, Sensory Objects, Maurice Merleau-Ponty provides us with a useful anecdote about our relationship with things in the world, one in which our notions of interiority and exteriority are collapsed or intertwined. Quote, "Our relationship with things is not a distant one. Each speaks to our body and to the way we live. They are clothed in human characteristics, whether docile, soft, hostile, or resistant. And conversely, they dwell within us as emblems of forms of life. Of course, such a relationship is not always immediately available. Spoken from the objectified machinations of life as a means to life, what we might call our punishing, idiomatic loops, Jane's poetry reminds us that such an intimacy with the world is a continuous struggle. For Jane, it is not just a question of how everything operates, but how to be occupied with these operations. How to let perception enact a disposition in which we live out our frustrated emergences as incomplete beings, always reaching beyond the tired, repetitive frames of knowledge. Jane's poems hinge on the capacity to create new forms for feeling and perceiving in language, such that language can facilitate its own crossings. Running throughout her work, there is the motif of reciprocal and repetitive motions that seem to produce their own excesses. Such an effect is generated not only by verbal repetition, but echoes of sound and sense which turn against each other. Concepts and phrases get recycled and refigured. We can see this at work in the first three lines of her poem, Beyond Theody, Idiom, Dear Faith. This is the sound of the sun on a loop. What was the sun is the sound of a loop on. This is a range arrayed in able. So the sound of the sun on a loop is both asserted and retracted, almost arrayed as an able impossibility. Such repetitions carry the capacity to isolate and arrest us. As we see in a line from the same poem, bone is demented cement, cemented lament. Such oral play is not only comic but tragic, as it is these very frames of understanding which reproduce the captivity of every day. Life becomes an alienated joke we live out, that place where, quote, I do my actions. It is ultimately our capacity for transgression, to go beyond the lies we use to frame situations, that brings forth our deep investment within things. We can see something like this in the C section of her poem, Alone Any More Than We Can, where we encounter a name, quote, slithering about the cortex, end quote, back and forth, seemingly measuring the, quote, difference between prayer and where what there is came forth. These propositions do not serve as catalysts for some positivistic faith. Rather, they seem to put in motion the chiasmic structures where one can imagine, quote, nothing on fire, or, quote, fire on nothing at all. Jane also recognizes that to enable such an emergent structure requires the refiguring of perception itself. In her poem called Image, we see the figure of Joshua railing against the windows that refract and dismember him, represent his failures to engage the world. Instead, we must rely on this, quote, carriage of sight to put us out among the discontinuous, jarring world of others. It is in this world where we cannot close the eyes of the lion, efface the lightning from the sky, or erase the memory of a sister, where history is always available to be exhumed. The stakes are high for these poems, after all, for what occurs in the sphere of representation has everything to do with how we organize and live in the world. As we are reminded in her poem, the beyond being faith as an underground begins. We must, quote, stop misreading imperial as empty real on the page. To restore our intimacy with things in the world is to facilitate the feeling in the poem where, quote, all this information unorganized is by accident. For it is this accidental aggregation that embodies the, quote, necessary unreeling of the world, that spreads out the spin of it, its mystery, consider it. Thus, there is a way in Jane's poetry in which we are asked to understand the unreeling or the letting go of the world as a relationship of care, one in which the gestures we make undo us, make us available for new kinds of commitments to the things and people which populate our world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Jane Gregory.
Thank you, Christopher. That was beautiful. It almost made me proud of my poems, which doesn't happen very often. And thank you all for coming. It's really nice to read here for the first time in Berkeley. The first thing I want to do is read a poem that I didn't write. It's by Jack Spicer, and as a lot of you probably know, he was here for a long time as a student, a researcher in the linguistics department, and as a teacher here in this building until the funding was cut. So this is an early poem, and it's very dark, and it's just in the hopes that none of us will have to write a poem this dark in the near future. So this poem is called Berkeley in Time of Plague. Plague took us, and the land from under us rose like a boil, enclosing us within. We waited, and the blue skies writhed a while, becoming black with death. Plague took us, and the chairs from under us stepped cautiously while entering the room. We were discussing Yeats. It paused a while, then smiled and made us die. Plague took us, laughed and reproportioned us, swelled us to dizzy, unaccustomed size. We died prodigiously. It hurt a while, but left a certain quiet in our eyes. The first poem of mine that I'm going to read is one that Christopher quoted from, Beyond Theody, Idiom, Dear Faith. This is the sound of the sun on a loop. What was the sun is the sound of a loop on. This is a range, arrayed and able. Officer, I heard the sound of the sun, and it meant burn them down, and was smart, arson, and underneath arson, dirt, and under that my eyes. This whole road was made of my eyes, many, many eyes, and was called for, called vision, that carriage of sight, the wheels of which, through motion, make music. Then you strike a note, and I decide for what it was struck, say stricken. Say I am as I am able, a donation. Bone is demented cement, cemented lament. And all motions were repetitive motions, the wind in the tree, the wind on a loop. Science was the only joke we had, and we told it back and forth. Sometimes it went, life is where I do my actions. Sometimes it wept and wept. We were too old to listen to one another's radical music, but a state was speaking in, see that carriage, then those tanks. We were in a state. We spoke of it. Were made native. This is beyond the manifold neighborhood. There is the Taurus your fist tried to make when it swung around to make you face me at the table the witness to the integration of grapes, the table to drink under, to mine thirst. There is everything within the Taurus that is also frozen. Without time passing, there is still a circuit to speech, a gate to a green psyche. There is still terror and a river, only the river is arguably captured in a way it wasn't before, arguably not. There is still the idea to surrender, to sit down at the table and say, you must see the fire before you light it, and attempt to measure a chariot or a distance beyond it, to say what you desire second order, the humus, the worm, the humus, the black tongue of the black adder, the coccyx at the end of the words coming out of your mouth, the coccyx in the index of axes by which we proceed. Some others are loss, hoarding, skeleton, and disease. Still at the table, you have to say, if you put much into it, that much into the journey it goes. Before we have to run, we should try to uncount the sides of this enclosure. Leaving before anything moves means that wind does not blow through the window and sound off the papers on the table. That when the train that is now passing does not pass, you do not say that train is only one string on the fretted tracks, and this place where now we used to live is not a note to play, not a fact or a mystery of that same. A lot of these titles have slashes in the middle, but I'm not pronouncing them, so I'm just pausing. So this one is called Nope, Open. I make the sense, the zone in which everyone is with their arms up. And on that day you were speaking, but I meant it. If we see them waving their arms from their bodies, but hear no music, is there any dancing among them? Is one doing the catastrophe dance? Is the other claustrophobic? There, in the glassed-in span, they are in common with the room they're in, but not with any noise. So, wasn't I speaking? Didn't we go outside? When that time, at it, the law was, this law is general, and only in chaos be easy. Like an orb, pinned to a visor or an alp. Oh, officer, do you see us in trouble, and us in a mess of it, and thank that mess for it, for we commissioned it, and it you. Think trouble looks like the dance in which one is walking around, looking to be loyal, and the other is getting work, or wants to answer the asked question with both hands. Oh, officer, when you say no, your mouth stays open. You just leave it open like that. To look just like, When you say no, your mouth stays open like that. You just leave it open like that, and at the end of yes, you hiss your brief smile. With that same little mouth, you open and keep open to look just like you're breathing. Do you see us getting out of here while you stand there where your open mouth said no? Your mouth too alone as the only thing that opens where it ends. Image. Joshua is smashing all windows in which he reflects a pig, and his sister is the fly on his tail, and his tail is the shadow of a pig. His sister watches, washing windows, and the light through the window does nothing to her face. in this place where scratching at the walls leaves ribbons, and removing your nails ribbons of blood, and this same compulsion can't remove the carriage of sight from the eyes of the lion, and can't close the eyes of the lion, who was still while the lightning that never left the sky was like the light doing nothing to his face, and like the sun that always buries its face in the fire, that digs up the lion, digs up the statue of a bird on Joshua's flesh head. Faith in the never beyond, in other words, Guncotton. Red is when the bleeding and the pressure applied to stop the bleeding are the same thing. A picture of clarity is when a bone hinge does not resemble a joint or a picture of beauty. Can I make things here? Can I say the making of important things like endogens make or tectonics make? I want violence to do before you. Because I framed a diagram to save it, I mean redemption, as in one axis was the perfect arrangement of the letters required to spell conduit, the other conduct. Whatever was not lost was unreasonable and emptied out of it everything. I will say something about ice, but I was paid to use the word red. I want to be making an argument that spontaneously breaks into a description of what obliterates the question, triggers a private memory even. It must be a mirror reflecting the history of Guncotton. True mirrors, screens. Can you repay me directly, producing an impression, extracting failures, without conjuring up an image of skin, worms, splinters, now the dead? Remit them there. Repeat the point of authorizing the impossible, and you will know what forgets you each time you fall asleep. Disasters. I want to do violence before you, head. All I can think to do to the tree is say there is wire in its branches. There is a bird, and brave, be brave. There is brave, it being and being. I know, but nothing but teach the grid to be where geometry is practiced. This is from a longer poem. I'm just going to read part of it. The poem's called Several Mornings at Once. It isn't morning. There is nothing will make things simpler. The hot wind isn't helping. If I address one instead of you, am I an authority? How many officers does it take to authorize the author's arrest? If I look up dictionary in the dictionary, can I begin again? I am the audience of the engine, the revolution that carries its audience to the revolution. There is a whirring and a grinding, listen, I admit it, everything is in the dictionary. Even the root in the engine thought far from the ground or there to get us away from it. Not the root in, the root of. Oh well, audience, don't go. Come to my house for dinner. I'll go to the market on the way home, to its cold air, limp and crisp fennel. I'll say the anecdote about being related to Leopold, but at supper it will be Loeb, because that's the truth, and my friends, we can't all audience, all poem. Then the Crays, the brothers Cray, or no murders. Maybe let's talk about Brackage, living in the basement on Baker Street, how they learned and we should practice a domestic that expects you. It's a way to exercise what cruelty I have, that I want you to choose to listen to me, but only the words I say. And we will turn to the world we have let happen and wish to quietly turn over, not like an engine turns over, like relinquish, the long 20th century, though not to what's next, relinquish untowards. The letting is the first problem. Unleash me. It didn't happen as music let happen, released what we heard when it played. I want to tell you about when we agreed to magic, that image, dear assembly, and on what came then passed through the room's door. This one is called Because We Had Spoken of a Garden, They Thought We Were in It. Actually, I'm not going to read that one. But that line is from Yeats, just so you know. This one is called Tripwire. From thou to thou at 10 to 2, here I am, pure noise. Your mouth is then its teeth's receptacle, hating saying, struggling to say, literal. Literalness is litter all over us, and we are on its road, its way to away from us. Out of your mouth it came frayed, The wire, round action. The wire, the horses trip for Muybridge. Out of your mouth the yawn as the moon is the long yawn of the sky's mouth. Unwhite, white throat throb. Your bald yawn of saying thou misses the. Beyond a vowel that circles, the only one that circles like a bird, encircling nature with labor, that ring of wire around the moon. Oh, bespeak, then, orb bereft, a vowel is an ocean, as everything is its own ocean, everything on the shore of everything is an ocean, to itself, near an ocean, the sky is an ocean, the boat is. See, remove what you did to the field, the diagram you drew of building the boat. Now, there, a picture of the ship, the plans from which you may build her, the diagram, and sail to that being conceivable. On the road or the ocean to it, fire, I have fought with the fire. I have lent you this bird, thick and brown, I have lent you this horse. I have lent you this horse, now spare it. Now I'm going to read just a few more, and they're from a new thing that in my head I call books. So this is Book I Will Not Write, number 3. This is the book I must and know how to write because and therefore it helps you. It is music to your ears, if you will. Music made of the music your ears make from what reaches them. It makes us so close that way, ear to ear. In this book, you come to see that in what use I make of language every day, when I say I don't know and you know, they are identical. This is a book of petty kindnesses that are neither endearing nor ingratiating. In essence, even after this book, you are alone. The kindnesses are really just propositions. One was the promise that if I have powers and go deaf, you will only maybe become mute. If in this book I am a monster, what you get is the benefit of leaving it and going on to look like what you have been through rather than what you are in. Book I Will Not Write, 7. This book has a purpose, and in fact its purpose has a purpose. This book will function to make you raise your hand, for example, at the moment you think cherry, after I have given the orders of pit and stem, without having told you to raise your hand when you think of a cherry. The funding for this book was provided by the Institute for Research in the field of cognitive reflexology. This field aims to replace the concept of thinking with cognitive reflexology, thereby dismantling the belief in thought. In a way, this goal is a part of what the Institute believes to be a kind of correctness, in the spirit of the differences between the words retarded, disabled, and challenged, for instance. This book is the manual by which the citizens' reflexes are conditioned. This book is also a test to determine if we can go on communicating. This book is a problem. It is important to remember that this book was not my idea, nor did I foresee that as a physiological alteration of the condition of its readers, it would be classified as a drug that the FDA would allow straight to and through a first-in-man clinical trial, the results of which made the Ethics Committee take another look. The Ethics Committee read the book, and under their advisement, the book was not approved and therefore never published. It didn't even see the light of the internet. However, the committee had been conditioned, the book was a success, and this had the unpredicted but correct, because if thought is replaced by reflex, wrongness disappears, effect of my arrest, trial, conviction, and imprisonment, which I did not, because I could not, think of, although the crime itself was thought. Book I Will Not Write, 9. This is a collection of 2 shorter works. The first book is the one after anxiety, as in on its other side. This book denies that poems are themselves books I cannot write. The second book is the book before anxiety, both in front of it and at its face. It was written out of a desire now more than ever to be what I cannot and to have the time to know what I need to. This book, the Book of Shame, is dedicated to my editor. Please write back. That's all. Thank you.
How's this? Is this audible? Okay. I have a bad habit of being too tall for lecterns. My name is Stephen Lance, as Lynn said, and I wanted to thank you, Lynn, for that ridiculously generous introduction. It's an honor just to be speaking here between these two poets, and especially to be introducing Alan Bernheimer. Mr. Bernheimer is the author of several books of poetry, including the brand new The Spoonlight Institute, which is over there, and which you can purchase afterwards. A New Yorker by birth, Alan Bernheimer studied with such poets as Bill Berkson and Ted Berrigan at Yale before moving in 1976 to San Francisco. Here he interacted closely with a group of young writers soon to be known as the San Francisco language poets. This, as you probably know, is an illustrious list of names: Ray Armentrout, Carla Harriman, Bob Perlman, Kit Robinson, Ron Silliman, Barrett Watton, and our own Lynn Aginian. In this milieu, Mr. Bernheimer acted for the San Francisco Poets Theater and contributed the play Particle Arms to its repertoire. In fact, and happily for us, the text of this play is included in the Spoonlight Institute, so you can now stage productions at home with your family and friends. It's also available on Pen Sound. You can listen to it if you prefer that. But to be serious, it's truly delightful, it's totally bizarre, and yet also totally human. To give a sense of the play, the play's protagonist is a character named Bunker, a sort of snarling Philip Marlowe as Willy Loman as Dee Dee and Go-Go, who makes a living catching bullets in his teeth in a traveling stage show. And I won't quote extensively from the play, but I will say it contains some of the most exquisite one-liners in literature, and I have a few examples here. I have lived here for several phone books and expect more than a slap in the face with a frozen chicken. I'm too light for heavy work and too heavy for light work. Any leisure we had, we spent knitting khaki mufflers. And probably my favorite, only novels end when they feel like it. In short, I recommend it, and wholeheartedly so. I'll resist the temptation to quote from Mr. Bernheimer's poetry, since he will soon be doing that. But I would like to speak a bit about... Seriously. But I would like to speak a bit about my impressions. There's a certain dance I know from masterpiece theater dramatizations of Jane Austen novels, in which each dancer is spun through an alternating circuit of partners in powdered wigs, each propelled forward by the music, his or her own momentum, and a series of quick tugs from the arms of the other dancers. The effect is like speed dating set to music, or the human enactment of a large-scale water slide. In Alan Bernheimer's poetry, I find something like this dance taking place. I say this especially because much of the life of these poems seems to be lived in the unpunctuated, interstitial spaces connecting Mr. Bernheimer's sometimes astonishingly self-sufficient lines. In many of these poems, each line constructs a complete and vanishing world, which the next line supplants, unmakes, or refashions. An image appears in our reading minds, a half-remembered phrase floats into our ears, and immediately it fades, mutating as it does into new forms. I am struck by the capacity of these poems to marry linguistic precision with pure and ghostly suggestion. In the ethereal wordscape these poems inhabit, I find myself dancing with concepts whose names I will never learn, tracing images I lose even as I construct them, and encountering a field of faceless dramatis personae whose speaking voices reverberate into an elided past and evaporate. These images, sounds, puns, jokes, and expressions of longing strike us as pairs of eyes our reading gaze will never forget, though the poem's lyrical dance will have carried us to the other side of the room by the time we become aware of them. Alan Bernheimer's greatness perhaps consists in the discovery his poems lead us to make, that we love both the lost pair of eyes and the dance to which we lose them, that each configures and defines us, and that neither will be ours when the music has ended. Please join me in welcoming Alan Bernheimer.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I checked on Facebook before I came here. It said there were going to be 3 guests at the event, and I was one of them. The other 2 of you know who you are. The opposite of Proust. Old families last not 3 oaks, but stave off elimination with endless paper and unmatched shoes, seeing film stars everywhere, set big machinery in motion, and never know what to do in the presence of heartbreak. Could success amount to nothing more than showing off particles of the world? Swaps, caps, floors, and costless collars, they're not real. And too many eggs in that basket are not performing. Errors approach infinite sparseness as the Lord raptures your hand, and the way up is rounded and slow with small lamps at the clearance points for the unknown relation between objects and beings. That poem was written several years ago and turned out to be somewhat prescient because the line swaps, caps, floors, and costless collars, of course, refers to numerous financial instruments which indeed have proved to be not real. As you may know, this is an epigraph from Charles Peirce. Every man's senses cue his observatory. It may be possible to do without dancing entirely as far as time goes, with tendency to have things happen. Look upon this plastic life of nature or the hegemony of baritones and lift the steaming herd above a still landscape engraved by Greek upon gems. I've got to have results and to hide the details under and remember every time like stations of the cross. The rabbit always thinks it is fascinating the anaconda. But what is the good of making mistakes if you don't use them to distinguish former glory from sunrise in a rearview mirror or a bad day at the office? Melancholy is the new irony to make sense of people like offstage scenery. Before all this technology used an eye widener on the sleep of reason. One swing unsphered in a void, and perspectives in graphite dissolve to the opening sequence. The embedded self. The epigraph here is from Charles Peirce's friend, William James. No one sees farther into a generalization than his own knowledge of detail extends. Only that which is absent can be imagined to await the thickness of things, like birds entangled by their feet. Big decisions should be made over little bottles, and squelch the small-town inge with dark amazement. He was no friend to water, but let the train of events get away in a dime-a-dance world where days are numbered, despite Esperanto, by unwanted rest with cold, awful dues to pay. Security isn't interested in all this confusion, sleep depravity, or political prawns, while satisfying lifelong dreams drives a souvenir pluriverse through sleeveless errands to handle and fold. My Blue Hawaii. Every queen loves a lobster with the nerve to kill time, since it's easy to be sure in a bistro where more than dogs are turned away. Your mother had the particle, but key words are too brittle to warp the probity of a lifetime for a perp walk through a wafer fab. If you don't pay attention to the little things, the big things will fall down. It's only a pay-per-view moon, and slowness makes everything royal. Piece of Cake. This was commissioned and written for an anthology and events here at UC Berkeley several years ago that commemorated the 60th anniversary of the bomb. And an anthology was edited by Lynn and somebody else. Thank you. Called Ghosting Atoms. And it's called Piece of Cake. And the opening image is from a film that people of my generation at least will remember called Your Friend the Atom. And it was a Disney production about nuclear energy, and the nature of a chain reaction was illustrated by a room full of mouse traps all over the floor with a ping pong ball set in each trap that had been set, and then one ping pong ball was tossed in and obviously triggered one of the traps. And you can see what happened next. Piece of Cake. Mouse traps and ping pong balls minus contravention of nemesis. For that matter, lint used to be your clothes, and any longevity won't come from how to know the answer to everything with the defects of its qualities. I hate to tell you this, but beware the sweetness of things, or epitaph time will strike you right between the eyes like 7 more rockets fluorescent with ambition. Everyone's childhood is a psychological martini, with the qualities of its defects running out into the sand. Sleep City Squeegee. Words have the same consistency as images in all their instars, as if sentimental chameleons lavished thicker sunlight once the horizon disappears, and powder of sympathy navigates the real world made of real words, champagne and salted almonds, over and over again in a hail of bullets. Nobody knows what kind of trope has your name on it, but glance on a great stir. This then was now. We can screen scrape it in. Prior art spray for Linoginian. The world just appears due to the ignorance of sentient beings, and the usual dachshund in dotted Swiss thickly settled for a measured mile. Even shapes must have a likeness, how puppets dream of being human in this filmic backwater, where elderly princesses sit in little pools of deportment regarding the blue of birds. Ideas take the place of sorrow, indistinguishable as larches, letting the clock run out on the you-me phenomenon. The crazier the people you are sleuthing out, the nearer you are to an end of trouble, with bunches of glum airmen moving in diplomatic circles. Leaves brush open a star as the tide plants a kiss on the shore. I read, therefore I think, grim twinkle, skid in the shot. The logic of the gloomy woman made radiant by artificial light was inevitably to retreat. Departmentnine. Somehow I've been convinced that Departmentnine is a French expression for a bureaucratic black hole, but I've never been able to find any evidence that that is true. I've looked on the internet many times in 2 languages, nonetheless. Departmentnine. Email and epiphany target one's person to begin with all the time in the world for ab and other illities. The regime is coup-proof. We get what we need from arithmetic, and floozies with Uzis dance like yourself on fixed abode. It takes 2 to make eyes meet this side of crazy instead of a spark in ether, real tinsel and nonpareils, in a voice full of money. Your socks will still disappear with used atoms and men left on. Gravity Road. There are no rocking chairs in hell. I took the tour last week. Now I just want to browse, dig tunnels, build bridges, move mountains, let nature do the heavy work. My rule of thumb is sleight of hand and long of tooth. Spotless is my name. Sensational, crude essence fills the zoning envelope. Tab fields exit pupil. They're going to bench test your dive, and empty bottles absolve you of particularity. One day bumps the next. The things that befall words are accidents. Fire escapes romance the air, affection unabated in any scrape. Say uncle who motions dismay, for the time being gravity takes heart in. Word of art. First, a flicker of telepathy. Then screw le mot juste carefully into its socket so the electricity doesn't spill. Act natural. It isn't all honey for people with learning, and don't make excuses for rock. Eye on curve, hand on lever, things on mind. The rest of the subjects refer to you. Words make wide open spaces. Dissolve to perpetual motion with time off for behavior. The body likes its relations, embroidering inventions to say anything. This music is not of my choosing. The enormous seaminess throws a textbook punch, but it wasn't the stars that thrilled me. Specimen of an induction to a poem. Nature especially abhors the smell of vacuums, while the spiritual cottager frescoes his crystal ball, weak weather for a length of time. Images harbor messy affinities, like doctors were used to it. Once thaws gradually decline, spring leaves trees green, demonstrates words used as words, one breath of air, the next of smoke. But the picture doesn't recognize me. A unit of general signal should alter fate. Your furniture is 6 days old and sleep has absorbed falsehood. Resting objects, different as eggs, shadow thoughts. Botanical calm slips from stills. Personal life. A short fuse on a long afternoon, twinges for concentrate as silent upholstery after illusion, the one worth fainting for. The other steps gingerly into day, distinguishing each likelihood with a catalog of glances. There is no bowling alley to the subconscious, as Wake Up Fresh, made in Italy, designed by God, precipitates words into sight or intention to dismay. Every panorama does good that outlaws willies and belief in maps. Outtakes load the self of stardom. Canals on Mars break into print. Kiosk. Darkness. Darkness. Then the surface pictures a scene. Being with her, people want to die. All dreams contain the dreamer, whose revolving doors refer and refer such figs to vehicular sleep as waltz sweetly into each booth, exchange lip stuff and lunch on the Mississippi. Stop casting porosity with a body of meaning. Palming glances makes a party go, but angels can't have posterity increase. Exit the interior life for a stab at the gene pool as against trout ventilation service, touching a drop, wrought oxygen. It's hard on the heels of love that unrest victims combat philosophy trapped by self and moving parts, upside possibility from mouths of how. The line, being with her, people want to die, is what Arthur Miller said about Marilyn Monroe. A bottle in the smoke. The beach remains a tiny piece of the world. Who is playing opposite one, feeling for objects comes down with sight. Fundamental granularity is so lovely. Why are the balconies missing? Enough choices don't use much virtue, and little misbehavior passes through such big hands as red dots stitch fancy in blue sky. The hard time is for not telling. The trick is to see whose heart's gone trouting in a newspaper boat. Nature. The field needs a window to give onto itself, and of itself a view of smoke, distinguishing particles as from afar, as from a farm, with perfect hand-wringing and dilapidated guesses who is there, for who knows what season, alternating earnestly in memory of special felt delicatessen genes, with perfect handwriting as a charge for personality, and ventures beyond the funny house so eliminate the star qua stranger that buffers anonymity pills, that dualism is forlorn for native speakers in the first blush of omnium. apple of eye. Only trees keep up with memory's enlargement, the way gasoline evaporates miles into the landscape, and we need to asterisk out love obtained by filter. Loads of self pause for hold music, head for heights, observe radio silence with hooks to Renoir eyes. The dying heart can only march across the wide museum promising dances on railroad time, now that mental means modern again. Stolen hours are the sweetest sleep, while God abhors a naked singularity in the gymnasium of wind. Fine doings cast future light cones between jobs and the doings of fine men, alive and talking to strangers. The play of fruit upon the retina is sensuous by itself. Billionesque. Anything that is not analogous is all a dream, with too many cops partial to eel, another life wreathed in smilax peeling off the hills. Those present hear whispers between swiftly flowing words, boarding music, floor lighting. I could not be like that. A dailiness bereft of aperçu and feathered elliptical marquees where adagio dancers come up for air to innovate crisply. In case of rapture, this car will be empty, or deep carnation. Extras are called atmosphere, and few expect statues. The beauty of it is, I am not that important either. The Spoonlight Institute. The epigraph is from Paul Eluard. Days like fingers unfold their battalions. This has numbered sections. I'm not going to read the numbers. I'm just going to pause between sections. I'm tired of being so dismantled, decidedly thudless on hidden springs when the world always has an explanation for itself, going in and out of the woodwork. Will it hurt the picture to make the ether hideous? Longing leads the past around to the present, and suddenly some subtle entity vulnerable to too much time is supposed to shrink your wig? Why monetize the anomie and still go through shoes at this age where nothing is too much trouble? Decisions aren't made less likely by flashbulbs. Less fascinating than floor shows subsiding into hygiene eliminate guesswork by speaking in the language of things, as power messaging creates a hormone cocktail in your prospects, courtesy of Freud, the spectral getting practical for a fundamentally bad egg. Is this supposed to be a movie? The only secrets are taken to the grave, where everyone knows anything to put everything in perspective gets ironic in no time. Good hinges make such sad metaphors, with prepositions akimbo, and suchness is no stranger, knows in the cosmos, to alibi glamour that has a way with thugs like relativity to a railroad. No matter what folded maps just barely illustrate memory, all the future does is spoil the present, or change your longitude to the furtive lands and look into thought-colored eyes. The flight of geese through the drowsy mind is conducive to sleep, as evening to a caveman underlaps a substitute world, reminiscent of mist, but studded by intention to illuminate the air with eponymous bird. Personality is only a persistent error, to mope like a monument, where cooking takes the place of thought and the geezer keeps coming back for more. We felt our names erased by peculiarity, as if the mask itself were speaking about perfection of experience. We moved beyond the need for fact by access to power, how nomad detectors fuel deal fever, and the satisfactory inexpensiveness of nowhere seemed like a hand on your heart, or an outward sign of intended bleak, the horizon dissolving at dusk. Eternity of desire is the bright side of oblivion, whichever comes first. since puppy love bebop madness has no lessons for the eventless, and things bite back when fascination wears off. The early universe was perfectly fluid, but there isn't as much standby as there used to be when the public preferred their screens silent and age is replaced by possessions. You've picked up a lot of camping tricks in the margin of error, legally blind to the nondescript fluttering home through the half-light, much less fun than chain-smoking roll-your-owns, or a soiled dove taking shade on borrowed time, or come as your pet aversion with a houndstooth lining and no big eyes left of boom, unpeeled like animals. But back to the inventory. Don't get me started on nervous sleep, accelerating interest in comfort. Say goodbye to meticulous at humanity's loading dock. The imaginary future replaces the real one and delays mood episodes, subtracting adverbs from used literature with epic as the new awesome, walking through lightning and other people's dreams. Moving among gnomes outdoes a blind spot for irony, weak on verbs, the familiar false as a touchstone. Life is short to go to work and premeditate the next thought. You're not putting that atom juice on me with a word to the wires that diminish appetite for magnitude in any kite wind, the mystery of someone else, or remembered wallpaper, just the same as it is in Cincinnati, angling for fiasco. A sentimental nature is welcome to cheap stunts that make things matter if inside know-how summons the equipment to hollow victory, expecting anything of a stranger, too fast to live, too young to happy. Dreamy improvs lubricate the machinery of fate the way sarcasm is a little out of place in the jungle, cornerless as an end in sight. It's time to move the furniture, but I am not the person to see about that event horizon, or even think of uncertainty underneath everything. Since aliens ate my brain, numerous sounds of English make room for occasional tables and sudden behavior the world needs pills against. The worst part's almost over now, that fresh pictures take steps to smooth maps, while we noodle a glut of tunage and the star border dreams of electric soup. I am past work, capital being crystallized labor, so it's okay to blank out the whole kit and caboodle. One monkey don't start the show. This is an idiocy devoutly to be wished. Even in her chill zone, a failure on my head. Though each optical illusion is pronounced dead in the handed-down world. Check, 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 check. When the abyss looks back into you, very special is not very special. An agency sticks out like tripwire at the limit of expression, only separated by circumstance. No sleep, no soap, no towel, no breakfast. All this fun is killing me with spiritual bouquets at the place near the thing. Never mind my malady or mistaken identity with green around the gills. Extreme ladies help me develop current reality tree through settled affairs and evaporating clouds of emotional experience full of words. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan Bernheimer. Thank you, Jane Gregory. Thank you all for coming. Thanks also to Stephen Lance and to Christopher Miller for perfecting the art form of the introduction tonight. Hang about a bit, take a look at books. Hopefully, Alan will be willing to sign a copy if you buy it. And we'll see you back here in the spring for the spring readings.